Welcome to today's webinar. We will be covering the Targeted Runoff Management Grant Application Cycle for the calendar year 2023 Grant Awards. My name is Joanna Griffin, and I am the Runoff Management Grants Program Coordinator at the Wisconsin DNR. The agenda for today's webinar includes an overview of the Targeted Runoff Management Grant Program, or TRM Grant Program, and then the application information and requirements. So first, I'll discuss what all TRM grants have in common: grant resources, eligible applicants, reimbursement, economic hardship, and then I'm going to talk about the differences and eligible activities for each type of grant. So our TRM grant website can be found by going to the main DNR website and typing in TRM in the search bar. Here you'll find tabs with information, applications, and important forms, and links to relevant laws. As you'll learn later in the presentation, there are 4 categories of TRM grants. As part of one of the small-scale TMDL category, there's also an urban TRM grant. Information on this urban TRM grant is available on the website, and for purposes of this presentation, I'll be mostly focusing on the agricultural TRM grants, but I will provide a short summary of the urban TRM grant later in the presentation. The TRM program exists under the authority established in 281.65 Wisconsin Stats, NR 154, and NR 153. NR 154 identifies best management practices, technical standards, and cost share conditions that apply to the department, state agencies, governmental units, the Board of Regents, and cost share recipients when serving to provide or receive cost share funds under Chapter NR 153. And then NR 151 establishes runoff pollution performance standards for non-agricultural facilities and transportation facilities, and performance standards and prohibitions for agricultural facilities and practices designed to achieve water quality standards. So here's a map of all of the DNR runoff TRM grant contacts. I'm the statewide coordinator, but the staff here are your main contacts for specific projects and grants in your counties. And I will come back to this later in the talk as well. As I mentioned in the previous slide, I'm the grants coordinator. I work on the following: grant eligibility, application forms, application instructions, intake, scoring, and ranking, and allocations. Your regional non-point source coordinator also helps you with grant eligibility issues, pre-application project discussions, screening of applications, final reports, and reimbursements. And we also have a grants manager, Corrine Johnson. Corrine works with grant eligibility, allocations, awards, amendments, and reimbursements, and all parts of the grant process once the grant has been awarded. Let's take a look at our funding resources for TRM grants. The majority of funding for TRM grants comes from state bond revenue. Bond revenue can be used anywhere in the state, but it can only be used for construction of structural practices or force account, or activities directly related to the construction of structural practices. It can reimburse nutrient management plans only when they're part of a project that includes construction of manure storage or a barnyard. And you can see from the pie chart that the gray part of the funding pie, representing the state bond revenue, comprises almost 3/4 of the overall program budget. Federal 319 project funds also comprise a significant piece of the overall available funding and can be used for both cropping practices and local assistance. However, these funds can only reimburse work done in areas covered by an EPA 9 key element plan, EPA approved. State segregated funds can be used anywhere in the state and can be used for cropping practices and local assistance. And unfortunately, the segregated funds comprise a very small sliver of the overall funding available to these projects. Over the years, the amount of funding available for cropping practices and local assistance has been so limited, both in terms of the amount and where it can be used in the state. The department made the decision a number of years ago to prioritize the use of these funds in areas where resources are focused on implementing practices throughout a watershed, such as a large-scale TRM project. The reason being is there's much more likely to be a perceivable impact of such practices on water quality when their implementation is focused within a watershed rather than a shotgun approach. So this pie chart represents a typical funding mix, which is available for TRM awards in past years. This is the general grant timeline. Grant applications and instructions are posted on our website around January 15th of every year. This year, we posted them before the holiday weekend on the 14th. Today is February 15th, where we're presenting the grant application webinars. Grant applications are due on April 15th of every year. And between April 15th and July 15th, grant applications are screened, scored, and ranked. The preliminary ranked lists with draft funding lines will be presented at the August Land and Water Conservation Board meeting, along with the preliminary joint allocation plan. This may be pushed back to the October meeting if the budget isn't available by July. And the final rank list will hopefully be presented to the Land and Water Conservation Board in October. Grant awards will be given in late 2022 for funding beginning in January 2023. So I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions related to grant resources before I move on.
Hi, Joanna. We're not seeing any questions right now. So again, folks, you can ask your questions directly to the Q&A monitor throughout any point in the webinar. So if something pops up after we move on to the next section, we can certainly circle back. So,
all right. One second here. Okay, so eligible applicants are governmental units. Governmental unit means any unit of government, including but not limited to a county, city, village, town, and all of these governmental units listed here, such as drainage districts and school districts. So now I'm going to go into detail about a few other things that all agricultural TRM grants have in common. All agricultural TRM grants provide cost share reimbursement for control of non-point source agricultural pollution through the construction and implementation of agricultural best management practices, or BMPs. They offer up to 70% reimbursement of eligible costs in case of no economic hardship and up to 90% in cases with economic hardship. They only reimburse construction or implementation of BMPs for which no previous offer of cost sharing has ever been made. An offer of cost sharing means that it's an offer of cost sharing as part of NR 151 notice or county notice that meets the requirements of NR 151.09 or NR 151.095. And they only reimburse construction or implementation of BMPs that are located on sites not covered by WPDES permits. So TRM is a reimbursement grant program. What this means is that no money is provided by the state until money has been spent by the landowner to install BMPs. So under a typical TRM grant, the landowners spend their money to construct the project. They then request reimbursement from the grantee, which is typically a county. The grantee reimburses the landowner based on the cost share rate and the amount spent. And only after the project is constructed and the grantee reimburses the landowner does the grantee request and receive reimbursement from the state. So during the steps of the process shaded in gray, here, the grantee has paid money out and is reimbursed by the state in step 11. One acceptable deviation to this sequence is when the landowner completes the project and pays only their share of the project costs directly to the vendor, which is typically 30%. The grantee can then pay up to the cost share rate of eligible costs directly to the vendor. This option is advantageous to the landowner because they only have to come up with the local share of the project costs rather than the full costs and then wait to be reimbursed. The grantee still has to wait for reimbursement, however, and during the steps shaded in gray here, the grantee has paid money out and is reimbursed in the last step 9. Beginning 5 years ago, we made a third option available, and that allows the grantee to request state share reimbursement from DNR before reimbursing the landowner, which is shown in this slide. The reason for adding this option was to increase feasibility of utilizing the TRM grant program in counties that don't have enough cash on hand to reimburse the landowner before being reimbursed by the DNR. So another thing that is the same for all TRM grants is that a higher cost share rate is available in cases of economic hardship. So let's walk through the economic hardship criteria, which is established in State Rule NR 154.03. In order for a landowner to meet the economic hardship criteria and qualify for the higher cost share rate, they must submit an application to the governmental unit, and the governmental unit makes a determination of economic hardship. So it says the landowner or land operator shall submit an application to the governmental unit in accordance with this subsection in order to be considered for a determination of economic hardship. The governmental unit may not make a determination of economic hardship for cost share purposes until it has received a completed application. The governmental unit, which is referred to in NR 154, is the grantee, which is typically a county. So the determination of economic hardship is typically made by a county based on their evaluation of an application submitted by a landowner. However, keep in mind that in order for the DNR to reimburse the grantee at a higher cost share rate, the 90% rate must be in the grant agreement between the DNR and the county. So any county that approves the economic hardship must communicate this to the DNR and get a higher cost share rate in the grant agreement. The county needs to request a grant amendment to change the cost share rate, and then ultimately the cost share agreement needs to reflect this also. So NR 154 provides the information that must be included in the application from the landowner to the grantee, which is needed in order to evaluate whether the economic hardship exists. So either a CPA or an accredited financial institution must certify that the landowner is unable to make the 30% cost share rate contribution normally required, but is able to make the 10% cost share contribution. So there is a link to NR 154 on our TRM grant website, which I showed you earlier in the presentation. Additionally, NR 154 requires that the landowner provide a sworn affidavit that the information they've provided to the CPA or financial institution is full and true disclosure of their financial condition. And while NR 154 does not give DNR authority to specify the method used to determine economic hardship, it does give DNR authority to require that it approve the method used by the CPA or the financial institution to determine economic hardship. So I'm going to pause here again to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, again, not seeing any questions coming in right now, so we can continue on.
So now I'm going to show you the differences among all the grant categories. TRM grants are split into two different types based on the problem they address, TMDL and non-TMDL, and the size of the area they address, which is large and small scale. So we end up with 4 different types. TMDL TRM grants are for projects located in watersheds covered by an EPA-approved TMDL, total maximum daily loads. TMDL TRM grants must implement the pollutant-specific goals of an EPA-approved TMDL. In the TRM grant program, BMPs are only eligible for cost share reimbursement if construction of the BMP either 1, achieves compliance with 1 or more currently non-compliant NR 151 agricultural performance standards and prohibitions, or 2, implements a TMDL. Because non-TMDL projects aren't located in a TMDL watershed, they therefore must achieve compliance with 1 or more non-compliant NR 151 performance standards and prohibitions at facilities that are not now and have never previously been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard. And reimbursement is for compliance costs of existing facilities and croplands only. Oftentimes, however, NR 151 compliance is part of implementing a TMDL. So that non-TMDL TRM grants must address NR 151 noncompliance. TMDL TRM grants may address NR 151 noncompliance if doing so is required to implement the TMDL. However, unlike non-TMDL TRM projects, TMDL TRM projects can also cost share BMPs that exceed performance standards at sites that are already in compliance, if doing so is required for implementation of pollutant-specific TMDL goals. So in other words, if meeting the pollutant load reductions of a TMDL means going above and beyond just implementing the performance standards, then TRM can fund this. And TMDL TRM grants can also cost share BMPs that address pollution problems for which there is no performance standard, if doing so is required for implementation of pollutant-specific TMDL goals. So we've already learned that both non-TMDL and TMDL grants can fund NR 151 performance standard compliance at facilities that are not now and have never previously been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard. And reimbursement is for compliance costs of existing facilities and croplands only. This type of TRM project, NR 151 compliance, is frequently the source of confusion with the program. Specifically, there's confusion regarding how to determine whether or not particular facility meets eligibility criteria. So to clear this up, let's go through some example scenarios and try to determine if they would be eligible for TRM grants to address NR 151 noncompliance. Since non-TMDL TRM grants must address NR 151 noncompliance, I'll refer to this project type as a non-TMDL TRM grant as we go through examples in the coming slides. However, keep in mind that some TMDL TRM grants also address NR 151 noncompliance, and when they do, the same eligibility criteria apply. So let's go through an example to better understand how TMDL and non-TMDL TRM grants are different. For this example, the landowner wants to reduce pollution by stabilizing eroding stream banks. Is this an eligible non-TMDL TRM project, or is it an eligible TMDL TRM project? So let's consider the non-TMDL questions first. Is stream bank stabilization an eligible non-TMDL TRM project? The answer is yes. Because this is a non-TMDL project, the project must address non-compliance with NR 151 performance standard. For example, in this photo, we see a situation in which erosion appears to be caused by unlimited livestock access to the stream. Here's a list of agricultural performance standards and prohibitions from one of the TRM grant applications. Listed at the bottom is the agricultural performance prohibition, prevention of unlimited livestock, access to waters of the state, where high concentration of animals prevent the maintenance of adequate sod cover or self-sustaining vegetation. So if the project is stabilizing stream bank as part of addressing this non-compliance through fencing or relocation, then yes, this is an eligible non-TMDL TRM project. You can see the same site in this photo. The stream banks have been revegetated and animals no longer have access to the stream. So now let's consider the TMDL scenario. Is stream bank stabilization an eligible TMDL TRM project? So we already learned that both TMDL and non-TMDL TRM grants can address non-compliance with NR 151. So the answer has to be yes for the same reason and under the same conditions that non-TMDL projects are eligible. So are there any conditions in which a TMDL TRM grant could fund stream bank practices? We learned earlier that TMDL projects can also address pollution sources for which there's no performance standard. So let's consider a scenario in which stream bank erosion is not caused by non-compliance, such as unlimited animal access, but rather by changes in watershed hydrology due to agricultural land use in the upstream watershed. There's no performance standard that addresses erosion due to upstream changes in hydrology, even though this can be a significant pollution source. In such instances, stream bank stabilization would be an eligible TMDL TRM project, as long as the land use in the upstream watershed causing the erosion is agricultural, and as long as the stream bank stabilization implements the pollutant-specific goals of the TMDL. So I'm going to pause here since that was a lot of information, see if we have any questions.
You're doing a great job, Joanna. I'm not seeing any questions coming in right now.
All right. So let's look at the second way that agricultural TRM grants are divided. We have large scale and small scale. As their name suggests, large scale TRM grants cover a larger area than small scale. Specifically, small scale TRM grants typically cover an individual farm, whereas large scale TRM grant projects cover a watershed. And BMPs are constructed and implemented on multiple sites in the watershed. Oops. For non-TMDL projects, the size of the watershed addressed by a large-scale TRM project must be between 8 and 39 square miles, whereas the size of a large-scale TMDL TRM watershed size is determined by the size of the TMDL watershed, or for larger TMDLs, the size of the TMDL watershed reach. The maximum grant award for small scale is $225,000, whereas the amount for large scale TRM projects is $600,000. The small scale TRM grant period is 2 years, whereas the large scale TRM grant period is 3 years. Both large scale and small scale TRM grantees may request a 1-year project extension. However, they're not guaranteed, and grantees cannot apply for a grant with a project schedule that intends to take more than allowed by the initial grant period. Another difference between large and small scale TRM grants are the type of project expenses that they can fund. In addition to reimbursing BMP construction costs, small scale TRM grantees can request force account reimbursement. The maximum amount of force account that can be reimbursed is 5% of the state share amount reimbursed under that TRM grant project. Large-scale TRM grantees cannot request force account, but instead can request local assistance. The maximum amount of local assistance that can be reimbursed is 40% of the amount reimbursed for BMPs. So what's the difference between force account and local assistance? Force account is work done by the grantee's own employees or by the grantee's own equipment that's directly related to the design and construction of the BMPs constructed by the project. This is used in small-scale TRM grants. Local assistance is reimbursement for staffing activities needed to carry out the project. Although local assistance activities must be project related, they don't have to be directly related to the design and construction of the installed BMP. So there is more flexibility. Local assistance is used in large-scale TRM grants. Some examples of eligible local assistance activities are included on this slide, and the full list of eligible local assistance activities is listed in NR 153.16. So some examples are identifying pollution sources, contacting landowner, documenting compliance and non-compliance, identifying BMPs to address site-specific PSMP non-compliance. Another difference between the two grant programs is the type of BMPs that the program can reimburse. Small-scale TRM grants can only reimburse construction of structural BMPs, whereas large-scale can also implement cropping practices. Another difference, small-scale TRM grants can only fund nutrient management plan development if the nutrient management plan is developed in conjunction with construction manure storage or barnyard runoff control projects, also funded as part of the same TRM grant. Whereas large-scale TRM can fund nutrient management plans as standalone practice. Okay, so let's go over some examples of eligibility. In the first example, we have a livestock facility that's been in existence since before the effective date of the performance standard that's being addressed by the project. During the time since the performance standard went into effect, the facility has expanded from 500 animal units to 600 animal units. So is this site eligible for a non-TMDL agricultural TRM grant? And the answer is it depends. We do not have enough information. Just knowing how many animal units there are doesn't tell us whether the site is eligible for a grant. So let's add more information. Now we know that the performance standard status. The performance status was compliant before the effective date and is now non-compliant. In this example, the project is not eligible. Even though the site existed at the time the performance standard went into effect, it was in compliance at the time it went into effect. In order to be eligible for a non-compliant, for a non-TMDL TRM grant, the facility must be not now and never previously have been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard. So if a livestock facility falls out of compliance due to expansion, it is not eligible for a non-TMDL TRM grant. Here's another example. The status was non-compliant and now it's compliant. In this case, the project is also not eligible because the facility is already in compliance. In this example, the performance standard status was non-compliant before the effective date and is still non-compliant. This project is eligible. It was in existence and has been continuously non-compliant. How can it be eligible when the number of animal units has increased from 500 animal units to 600. The reason is that the magnitude of the expansion is not significant, which is defined by NR 153.15. In this last example, the facility has undergone significant expansion. Like the previous scenario, the site was in existence and continuously non-compliant since the effective date of the applicable NR 151 performance standard. However, unlike in the previous scenarios, the number of animal units has increased from 200 to 900. This project is eligible, but only the cost of bringing the facilities in existence on the effective date of the performance standard and prohibitions are eligible for cost sharing. So if the landowner is designing a facility for all 900 animal units, the eligible cost must be prorated by determining the base animal units that existed when the performance standard went into effect, and then calculating a non-significant expansion of that number. In this case, a non-significant expansion of 200 animal units is 250 animal units. Since the facility was designed for 900 animal units, the applicant would divide 250 by 900 and determine that 28% the total project costs are eligible for cost sharing. So the form is set up to calculate this for you. If you enter yes to the question about whether the application is a livestock facility, the application will prompt you to enter the number of base and design animal units into Part 3B of the small scale trim application. And the application will tell you, 1, is the proposed increase considered significant or non-significant expansion? And if it is significant, 2, the percentage by which the eligible costs must be prorated. So I am going to take another break for questions.
All right, Joanna, we have a question here. Are BMPs such as grassed buffer strips, riparian buffers, or grassed waterways considered structural practices or cropping practices?
Those are considered structural, but Corinne, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right.
Those are structural practices.
All right. Yeah, I think that is all that we're seeing that are coming in. Again, please direct your questions to the Q&A monitor. If you do have questions that are very specific to a project that you're doing, we are collecting your name and we'll follow up with you afterwards. But yeah, I think that's all we have so far.
All right, I will keep going. So although this presentation focused on the agricultural trim grants, I want to share a few things about our urban TMDL trim grant. We have had more recent interest over the last few years. So these compete directly with our small scale agricultural trim TMDL projects. They shall be designed to achieve attainment of non-agricultural performance standards by the department under 281.16. They must address urban development, and they have to be in existence or prior to October 1st, 2004, which is what our definition of existing urban development is. They must contribute to the removal of surface waters from the state's impaired water lists and consistent with the TMDL report and implementation plan. And they may not be used for NR 216 permit compliance. So I'm going to go over a few things to think about if you are applying for a trim grant. Scores for grant applications are based on competitive elements that are listed in administrative code. Applicants may score lower in some components and may not have the ability to improve scores in those sections because of locations. So water quality need is one of the highest scoring components, but because the water quality need component is based on project location, applicants do not have the ability to modify these scores. This is similar to the drinking water bonus component. There are other sections of the application form where applicants can provide better answers and improve their scores. Based on the 2022 applications, the following components are areas of the application where many applicants have room to improve. So for large scale trim, inventory and targeting section, the expected pollutant reduction and water resources response, BMP cost benefit analysis, and the local enforcement multiplier are areas where applicants can improve upon. And for small scale trim, the financial budget section, the project problem solution and expected benefits, and the local enforcement multiplier. So scores may increase or decrease based on how the questions were answered. Some questions on the application form require a narrative response and are more qualitative. Those scores are based on the following. Was the question answered? To what extent was the question answered? And like how much detail was provided? Were all components addressed? Was the answer clear? And although these sections listed for each grant type above may provide the largest gain, these listed on the slide here, there are many areas of the application where applicants can add a few extra points by being clear, detailed, and complete. We've made a few changes to all the TRIM grant application instructions. Oops, don't know what just happened there. So this included making the formatting more consistent among all types. We fixed minor errors. We tried to more clearly outline the scoring criteria in all sections. We also removed language about submission of hard copies and will officially accept and prefer electronic submissions. And if you plan on sending something through the mail and not electronically, please let us know so we know to look out for it. We aren't in the office as often as we had been a few years ago. So we want to make sure we don't miss anything. But we do have instructions now on how to upload and submit applications in our Wisconsin box, which should hopefully make it much easier. You won't have to send multiple emails to me to submit the applications. You can put all of the documents into Wisconsin box to send them to me. We also added a new filter question so that you are verifying that the project site is not specifically listed in an approved adaptive management plan or water quality trading plan, and that the resulting reductions will not be credited towards the achievement of any WPDES requirement or performance goal. We also removed the option of the heavy use area protection, BMP, which has already been removed from ATCAP 50 and NR 154. We added fields to the budget table to separate state share requests of different types of practices, such as force account, engineering, design, and construction. And this will help with developing the grant award and the need for Corinne to ask for that information later. We also added details to the filters for livestock facilities, which included a cap of 2 additional months of manure storage, so 8 months total for cost sharing with a justification. So here I've listed a few questions to think about before beginning the grant application process. And the answer to these questions will help you and your non-point source coordinator figure out if you're applying for the appropriate grant and if your project is eligible. Are you trying to address a non-compliant source a non-point source pollution problem. Which BMPs do you have planned? Is the project in a TMDL area? And how do you plan to meet the TMDL goals of this project? Is a project addressing non-compliance with an NR 151 performance standard and prohibition? Is it existing non-compliance? Are you a local government unit? And what is the water quality need? So as I mentioned earlier, the grant application instructions are located on our website. The instructions have a header that indicates the part and the question of the application covered on that page. Additionally, instructions are divided into columns with directions on the left and explanations of those directions on the right side. And they explain in detail the scoring criteria for each competitive element. As part of the grant process, it's required that the grantee identify and establish an authorized responsible government official, or ARGO. The ARGO is the only person that will be able to sign and submit grant agreements, amendment requests, reimbursement claims, and interim and final reports on behalf of the grantee. Make sure that the person authorized by the grantee is the person that will be doing this. An executed government responsibility resolution, or GRR, is required to establish an authorized responsible government official. The DNR recommends using a job title rather than the name in the authorizing resolution. So if you don't need to create a new GRR if and when there is staff turnover. So this slide shows the GRR template to be used by grantees in establishing your ARGO. The GRR must include language in the red box here. Pay special attention to those bullets. Some applicants prefer to use their own format for the GRR, which is fine as long as the information in these bullets are included. And lastly, remember to contact your regional non-point source program coordinator early to discuss your project. Don't wait until the week before. Ideally, a month or two beforehand is preferred. Understand leaving a voicemail or just sending an email before applications are due is not the same as a discussion. And cover the following topics: project eligibility, prorating eligible costs if applicable, proposed BMPs, permits and other feasibility issues, and water quality need. So I'm going to leave this here for a minute. This is also the map again with the contacts of who you will work with directly. And I can pause here for that is actually the end. So I'm going to just go back to that one slide here, leave that here, and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, we do have a few questions, Joanna. The first one, I think this is for both you and Corrine. A farmer called to ask if we can cost share a manure storage expansion as they intend to expand the animal operation. So do we begin the conversation with the math exercise? Follow up to that is, or is it simply a fact of compliance versus non-compliant status or expected status? And I know that's a long question, so I can any part of it.
Joanna, I can take a
go
crack
ahead.
at it if you want.
Sure.
Considering I've been staring at it since it was asked. Okay, I just want to say that off the top, we can't fund expansion just for the sake of expansion. So, in the case of a manure storage project, there's got to be, especially in a non-TMDL case, and really in a TMDL case as well, we've got to have existing non-compliance with a performance standard in NR 151. So the need for the manure storage needs to be driven by a non-point source pollution, an existing non-point source pollution control problem. In that case, maybe it's that they don't have a nutrient management plan, or they have a nutrient management plan that indicates the need for storage. And then having that justification and that documentation of that existing non-compliance allows us and makes that manure storage eligible. And then, as Joanna pointed out, we do have the ability to fund up to 20% expansion. So we don't start talking about the math until we know that we have existing non-compliance with a performance standard, because we can't fund new non-compliance essentially. And it would be assumed that having insufficient storage would be a form of new non-compliance. So you really got to look at that NR 151 compliance status first, and then factor in the level of expansion, and then begin that proration exercise.
All right, thank you so much. The next question for you, Joanna, is you mentioned something about a drinking water bonus. Can you explain that further?
Yes, so all of our grant applications, we provide a drinking water bonus if the grant project is in certain areas of groundwater protection. I don't know if I don't have the map up, but it's a maximum of 7 points, I think, depending on the location.
And it's also surface water.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, in the case of a groundwater project, but in the case of surface water, you're looking at kind of that wellhead protection or that surface water protection area, that source water protection area. And I think that the map that we have in the application instructions ties points to drainage areas where, particularly Lake Michigan, I believe, is the drinking water source. And then inland, is it in Wapaka County, where we have a surface water-based drinking water source. But it's essentially tying that project to those source water protection areas. If your project is essentially going to be helping to protect those source water protection areas from non-point source pollutants.
Right, and all of our instructions have a map. It is one of the appendices includes a map of those areas.
Yep.
Great. Next question. I think this is for both of you. In the case of a small scale farm within a TMDL, with the cost of equipment to support changed cropping practices, such as a planting drill or a manure injection that in turn supports the goal of TMDL compliance, be considered structural practices, therefore eligible for cost share dollars?
So we don't reimburse or cost share for equipment. I don't know if we cost share for structural practices only.
Yeah.
In these grants, or in a large scale for
yeah, in the
practices. But,
right, in the case
yeah.
in the case of like establishing you know, a cropping practice like cover crops, or you know, any situation where there's specialized equipment needed for interseeding, whatever, we don't pay for the equipment, that non-stationary. We're unable to. It's ineligible. You know, certainly the cost of, you know, purchasing the cover crop seed and establishing that cover crop is what is eligible. And it's not to say that the cost share rate, that flat rate, if it's used, can't be used to then subsequently help cover the cost of any specialized equipment that's needed by the farmer. But the farmer can't directly seek reimbursement for that equipment. And then the same with manure application. We do not pay for manure spreading. We cannot pay for manure spreading equipment. That is not a non-stationary equipment is not an eligible cost.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Next question. Could you go back to the resolution slide, Joanna? I think we have someone who'd like to see that again.
This one?
Yes, I believe that is correct. There was not a follow-up question to that, so I'm assuming this person would just like to see that again.
Okay, and these are it also included as part of the instructions as well, so.
And she said, thank you, by the way. So
Oh.
the person that asked it.
You're welcome.
Yes.
All right, the next question is actually going to another slide. If you could go back to the urban slide and explain what was meant by reducing surface water. This individual may have missed something here.
I have to remember where I did that. Contribute to the removal of surface waters from the impaired waters list, which is what our TMDL grants work towards.
Yeah.
This goal.
You're essentially trying to remove water quality impairments, thereby giving us the ability to take surface waters off of the state impaired waters list. So we have to list surface waters on the impaired waters list that are not meeting water quality standards. And the TMDL is a methodology for working towards that and trying to achieve water quality standards. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. And then the last question I'm seeing here, could you describe what documentation is needed for water quality need?
Yes, so and I think we've changed most of the applications to basically you're either in a TMDL, so that's a water quality need there. You're I'm trying to remember all the different categories. So you would, if you were in a TMDL, you would list your TMDL that you were in.
Yeah.
If you were in, let's see, what's another example here?
You know, I think if you were, let's say, a groundwater project, you could provide some documentation showing that the groundwater in the area exceeded an enforcement standard for nitrates. If you've got an exceptional resource water or ORW, outstanding resource water, you could provide some documentation from DNR, and you can work with your regional non-point coordinators or DNR biologists to determine that. You could go to the surface water data viewer and print a map showing that the water body in your area met a certain water quality need specified in the grant application. You know, I think the surface water data viewer is probably one of the best tools you can go to, particularly for this, you know, the surface water quality need components in that question. That's probably one of the best tools, printing out a map and showing the various data layers that apply to that part of the question that you're seeking points for.
Mm-hmm. And I think the instructions give some explanation to this, if as well.
I think we talk about how to use the surface water data viewer for this purpose.
Yeah.
We're not looking for gobs and gobs of data, you know. We simply want to just have a verification for, you know, which box you've checked, essentially, to kind of just easily verify that. And our reviewers and scorers do in fact check that. And you know, we're really trying to get you the most points possible for the category that you qualify for.
All right, we have another question come in here. It says, on the subject of urban, are the costs of bioswales or permeable pavement projects that are designed to reduce total suspended solid contribution to TSS impaired waters within a TMDL eligible projects?
I
Yes.
think so.
Yeah, I think, you know, essentially you're going to want to look at the list of eligible urban BMPs in NR 154. If you're interested in doing urban practices in an urban trim project, just make sure that you are in fact seeking funding for an eligible urban practice, and those are outlined with the associated technical standards in NR 154. And I think they're even listed in the grant application instructions.
Yeah. And in the application.
Oh, and in the
itself.
application. Yeah.
Great. Well, while we are waiting here to see if there's any last minute questions, I am going to launch a quick poll. This is for documentation for extension for Dan and I. So if you wouldn't mind taking just a few seconds here, this helps our funding support. And I will just open up for any last words from Joanna or Corinne.
I don't have anything to add, but if you think of any questions later and want to email us, we'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all for attending.
And again, just as a reminder, this session was recorded. We will be processing and transcribing this presentation here. It'll probably take about a week or so for that to happen, but Joanna and Corinne will be following up with everyone with the link to view that presentation and that YouTube link later on. Corinne, any? Okay, you are welcome. Are there any other last minute questions that are coming in, Corinne?
I'm not seeing any additional questions at this point, but we did get some good questions today, so thanks to the group.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great conversation. Well, I think we're going to be ending early. Everyone gets an extra half hour to their morning. End the poll here, and yeah, unless there's anything else, Joanna or Corinne, just want to thank everyone for attending this morning. Thank you, Corinne and Dan, for helping in the background, and great job, Joanna.
Thank you.